Welcome to the Sports Science News. I'm your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my co-host, Dr. Tony Ricci. You can find our podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and some of you listen to Rumble, so you could find us there. Our special guest today is Dr. Michelle Singleton. She serves as a lecturer of exercise and sports science at Coastal Carolina University. Actually been there once. Early in her career, Michelle gained valuable practical experiences as a certified athletic trainer, personal trainer, and fitness center manager, while concurrently earning her master's degree in nutrition and human performance. Her research interests revolve around a variety of human performance topics, including sports nutrition education interventions, dietary and recovery strategies following exercise and injury, and Tony will love this, psychosocial aspects of sport-related injuries, as well as psychological interventions.
Love it.
Michelle, you just got your PhD when? Like super recent.
April of 2024.
Congrats. Great job.
Super new. So what's it feel like when people, you go from Michelle and everyone's like, hey, Dr. Singleton?
I feel like the coolest person in the room.
Well,
I sleep a lot more, so that's the best part of it, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, PhD can like wear you down.
Yeah, I've felt that over the last few years.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, for those of you who are listening and not watching, Michelle has a super cool shirt, tie-dyed shirt from the recent ISSN Bonita Springs conference. You know what? Before we get to the conference, Tony and we need to promote what's coming up in November, Tony.
We have our the official ISSN Fight Science Seminar, right?
Yep.
And this will be, I think, our second.
Second one.
We don't do it annually, but it does occur once every 2 to 3 years. Fortunately, I'll be there with you all. Dr. Jamie Tarter, Dr. Antonio, of course, Dr. Peacock, Julius Thomas will be joining us, world champion boxer and kickboxer Chris Algieri. Cassandra Evans will also be there, who's done a lot of work of recent with us in the mixed martial art field, right? In both writing and her research. So, and we will be up here in Boca, am I correct?
Actually, we'll be at Nova Southeast.
I'm sorry, this year at Nova. Last time we were at IHP. Yes, we will be at the Nova Southeastern Fight Science Lab.
Yeah, so Michelle, if you can make it down,
I'll try my best.
All right.
I'll
That's
hop
good
on a
enough for
flight.
us.
Get there as soon as I can.
If you want to hang out with the cool kids, come down. If you don't, and you just want to hang out with the nerds over in Carolina, well, that's your calling. So.
It's funny. Whenever I call myself cool in front of my students, they tell me very fast that cool people don't tell themselves that they're cool.
That's kind of a line. What is that? So it's almost the Walter Payton line. When you're good, you tell people. When you're great, people tell you. Kind of that type of thing. I like it.
Yep, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Okay, let's talk a little bit about science. And you had a recently published paper, actually in one of the top journals. It's top 5% in sports sciences, the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Let's see, you're the lead author, is Singleton et al. Differences in perceived energy and macronutrient requirements across divisions in NCAA athletes. And you can go into details, but the one question I had, which I thought was kind of interesting, was you found sex differences between male and female athletes in terms of questions they can answer correctly, and that men actually answered better.
Yeah, I know.
Were you shocked?
Yeah, we were shocked by that. Absolutely. I thought the female athletes would have destroyed it.
So tell us a little bit about this project.
Yeah, so this honestly is kind of what kickstarted my dissertation, all the research I've done since. So Dr. Chad Kirksick is on this, and he was my dissertation committee chair. So he and I worked really closely on all these different projects that we've done. But when it came to meeting him, I still had like 2 years left until I was even at the proposal stage of my dissertation. We were brainstorming ideas, and we were talking about sport nutrition knowledge, how it could be impactful for an intervention, and kind of going that route. And we were originally talking about that for my dissertation, but I was like, I'm not going to just wait 2 years to do anything. Like, why don't we do this now? And I build off of it as we go. And Dr. Andrew Jagum had just released a couple publications at Sport Nutrition Knowledge Aspects, and then just perceptions of energy and macronutrient intake. So we collaborated with him, and we're like, why don't we look at this across divisions? Because the research was kind of limited when it came to looking at Division I, Division II, and Division III. And ideally, what we were thinking is that D1 athletes would probably score the highest, because typically they're the ones with the most resources available to them, whereas our D2, D3 athletes have less available to them typically. And D1 athletes scored the least on the sport nutrition knowledge, and they did the worst on all aspects. They perceived their energy and macronutrient intake the worst compared to the other divisions, which was really interesting and not what we anticipated to find. And we're kind of going back and forth. Go ahead.
Well, I keep telling the story, but just seeing that part, and Tony, I want your thoughts. I'm thinking maybe D1 athletes, because they're more talented, that they don't really give a shit about nutrition. And they're like, you know what? I'm already good. What difference does it make? Whereas D2 and D3 athletes have to try harder. So that's just pure speculation. Tony, what do you think? Why D3?
I was thinking the same thing. I'll defer to Michelle, on what her thoughts and position are or conclusions on that. But certainly, I think that would have been an immediate thought in my eyes. Very gifted. So there are people that have to work their way into the D1 level, but they've been able to get away with very often a lot more than athletes who struggled and clawed to get into a D2 or maybe D3 school, or were even trying to go D1 and fell just short, but took a lot of necessary steps in order to do that. But I leave that to you, Michelle. That's my thought as well.
Yeah, I was thinking similar, to be honest with you. And too, like when it comes to D1, you do have more resources. So you're kind of used to, I play my sport. I have all these other people who are going to fill in the gaps for me versus other divisions. It's kind of like, no, I got to kind of take this on by myself.
Great point.
I even think of like just strength conditioning. Not all D2, D3 schools have a strength coach for every single sport. So sometimes they do things on their own. They're shared between people, where the higher level you get all these specific individuals for you, essentially. So I kind of thought it had a lot to do with, no, as a D1 athlete, I'm going to focus, do what I'm going to do on the field. I'm going to let everyone else kind of tell me what I need to do in all the other areas. D2 and D3, they're also set up more for an academic base where you just play sports, versus D1 athletes. You're saying, I mean, they're highly gifted athletes, and a lot of times they're here to play their sport, and just getting an education is, a second to that, which is great, because some of them, they want to go pro. So that's their focus.
Got it.
How did you access the D1 athletes? Because isn't Coastal Carolina D2?
No, yeah, D1.
Oh, it's D1.
Yeah.
What's interesting about when I look at some of this type of survey work, and you have to define, and this is where it gets tricky, you have to define what is proper energy intake, protein intake, et cetera, et cetera. And I want Tony's thoughts on this. So daily energy intake values were calculated using a recommended relative energy intake value of 40, 50, and 60 kcals per kg per day for low, moderate, and high. And before Tony answers, I'll tell you this. I don't know a single person who does 50 or 60 kcals per kg. Like, nobody. Even, forget college athlete, even endurance athletes. I don't know any. And in fact, I'm not sure any do 40. So this is where it gets tricky, where you have recommendations. And Tony and I have talked about the carb recommendations, and we'll get to that later. We know what the literature says. But I know people who win races who don't do any of this stuff.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that?
You asking me or him?
You know what? Let's go with Tony first, and then we'll see what Michelle says.
Well, I will just say this. I mean, I agree with you, Joey, on the total intake. I mean, as I think about it now, if I'm going, I weigh an unfortunate number, but that would put me.
Wait, Tony, how much you weigh? How many kilos?
97.
Okay, so at the high end, Tony, you're eating 5,820.
That's yes, right. And I'd have to be, I would think, even if I was, trying out for the USA Olympic team and had 3 sessions daily, I wouldn't require that. But I don't know how you reconcile, to be honest, some of the literature that espouses that. And it's the same in many sports, right? we have scientific principles and guidelines that we recommend, but we have to adjust them over and over. Just quickly, and I'll close and let Michelle go to it. That was one of a great challenge on a current position stand we're working on. We have scientific guidelines on how to lose weight, how to optimize your weight for a fight sport, how to cut weight. The problem is almost no one follows those guidelines. So hence we have to address what they are doing with scientific practices instead of telling them what to do with scientific practices.
But it begs the question, and Michelle, we'll let you get in, but it begs the question, are the guidelines wrong? That's really the question. And me personally, I actually think they're wrong. I mean, or it's hard to say. Is it, we're trying to, give everyone these guidelines that fit supposedly, well, endurance athletes have to get 5 to 10 grams per kilo of carbs. And I'm like, I don't know anyone who does that. And I know people who win. So Michelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And at least for this, it was more of, okay, let's see what they think they're hitting and if they're even hitting it. Because another limitation, in my opinion, especially with this, is it's all subjective. And, we did all this based off the information they gave us, which could have been incorrect. Or they think they weigh more than they actually do, or they weigh less, whatever. And that's going to skew calculations too. But I think that also comes down to the fact, like, if we're going to kind of go against, well, these calculations are wrong, this is what we should be doing, we need to go back to, we need to track what all these elite athletes are doing and see where they're at, and then go from there. But then we have to track food intake.
And then you run into a different problem. Some would say, well, elite athletes can get away with a lot of stuff that the average athlete can't. So for instance, carb, and we've talked about this a lot, Tony, carb recommendations, they were calculated using 4, 6, and 8 grams per kilo per day. At least you didn't go up to 10 grams per kilo, because who the hell, I mean, you're eating like 10 pounds of rice every day. So even, I'll be honest, even at the low end, I know Louise Burke has data, and she always suggests at the low end 5 grams per kilo. And I don't know any endurance athletes that actually do that. And Tony works with a lot of fighters who their energy expenditure is ungodly high, even probably, it might even be higher than endurance athletes. Tony might want to correct me if I'm wrong there, but I don't think they're getting I think there may be 3 grams per kilo of carbs. What do you think, Tony?
I would think 4 might be the maximum, and that's for those that adhere closely to good dietary practices. Some do, but even, again, if you have a middleweight, just quickly, that weighs in camp, let's say 210 pounds, and then you're going at, 5 kilograms, well, then you're gonna be dealing with about 450 grams in carbs. So you're around 1,800, 1,900 calories in carbs alone. That would be rare to see a top MMA athlete adhere to that practice.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Michelle?
I think I just keep going back to, if you're going to say, I think this is too high versus too low, whatever it is, I think you're going to have to just go back and start actually tracking and going through that process, because otherwise we're just going to speculate, well, this is the ranges we need to be at. But then if we make it lower, what if that's too low? I think if you're going to make the appropriate recommendation for each low, moderate, and high activity aspects, you're going to have to do a lot more work.
Are you saying we don't want to do any work? Is that what you're saying?
You maybe.
Okay. And then my favorite, protein recommendations. So let's see, recommendations, they were calculated based on, I guess it would be low, moderate, high, 1.4, and then 1.6, and then 1.8 grams per kilo per day. And as you well know, I actually recommend much higher than that. So again, we're dealing with, and here's the funny part. I know what the literature says, but even I don't follow the literature, and I help write the literature. So
you did.
Yeah. So even though, and this is where it's tricky when we're writing the MMA position paper, it's sort of like, we know the literature, but this is what we do, which is different than the literature. For the position paper on protein, which I'm sure you read at least like 10 times, right? Before going to bed, Michelle, right?
Yeah. When I found out you were involved, it's every 5 seconds.
It's actually framed. I see it behind Michelle.
It is. It is.
Every time Michelle eats steak, she reads the protein position paper, which, is very good. But so I think at the high end, most will end around 1.8, actually about 1.8, 1.9, 2.0. And I recommend as the bottom 2.2 grams per kilo. So if you, let's say you have a sort of a well-read athlete and they say, you know what, I want to be in your study, but I think your recommendations are wrong. How do you address that with the athlete? They're like, you know what, I'm doing 2 to 3 grams per kilo per day.
See, now I am more, how do you address if you're saying, I played a role in writing these recommendations, but I don't follow them and I don't have athletes follow them. So what is your backing behind that? Where it's like, I had a part in these recommendations, but I'm doing something different. So what do we change?
That's a good question. And this is where I hate the word consensus. And people use this a lot in consensus. Well, the consensus says that, you know, anything above 1.6 grams per kilo, you're not gaining any lean body mass. And the problem with the consensus is that you're getting a group of people to, some agree, some disagree, but we're like, okay, it's good enough for most people. We're not going to fight over, you know, these numbers. You know, some might say maybe 1.8, some might say 2.2. So that's the problem with consensus. It's sort of like not everyone's happy, but not everyone's upset.
Right.
I actually base it on my own data, to be honest, and also what I recommend athletes to do. I never tell athletes to go 1.8 grams per kilo. I always say, well, it's kind of low. I mean, if you hit it, okay, but it should be higher. And so, okay, so why do I recommend that? Well, if they were doing poorly, then I'd say, okay, we need to change the recommendations. But if they're doing well, I'd say, you know what? At this point, maybe there's not enough RCT data on protein intake,
Sure.
but I'm not going to wait for a randomized controlled trial, or forget that. I'm not going to wait for 20 randomized controlled trials to give advice. And this is where it's sort of there's the art and science of nutrition recommendations. And I use a lot of art. I use some science, but I'm like, you know what? I'm not married to this. It's sort of, Michelle, you're probably too young. Do you remember when we used to look at paper maps?
Yes.
You do?
I do. I have one in my car just in case.
You have a paper map?
You never know. What if my phone dies or something?
Like a Rand McNally type, or?
Just like a normal map I can pull out.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
I'm sophisticated.
Yeah, I like those. It's good to be able to wave those. Good job, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, if I'm on the side of the road and my phone's dead, I mean, granted,
That's a
I
good
probably have a
point.
charger, but you never know.
Good point.
Well, I'm not sure how we got to the paper map thing. Okay. So to me, it's like you have a roadmap to get to somewhere, but there are multiple ways to get to it.
Sure.
And when you're talking about scientific consensus, the scientific consensus would be, this is, quote, the best road to get to your destination. I'm thinking, you know what? I'm taking a different road.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
So what do you think?
No, I like that answer, especially too, because when you take into account, one, everyone is different. Their sports are different. Everyone's activity loads are different. Positions are different. You know, I do a lot of research with our soccer teams, and the biggest example I even give in my classes when I teach this kind of stuff is you have a goalie and a midfielder, two different positions that don't do the same thing, you know, and they're playing the same sport, but doesn't mean they have the same requirements. So no, I think that is good. A good way to describe it. So a roadmap, but you're tailoring it to the individual at the end of the day.
And in fact, I like the goalie and fielder example. Even with strength and conditioning, a lot of people don't realize it is totally different. I mean,
they're a different species.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally, they do nothing remotely the same.
No. Not at all.
Right. The movement is different. The duration of activity is different. The mental skills necessary, attention span differs, everything. Yes.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yep. And then on the same sport, on the same field. Exactly.
Right.
Explain to the audience why it's different, because a lot of people view it as soccer is soccer, or I guess if you're in the UK, football is football, you know? That's for the British people and Canadians, I guess. So explain, Tony and Michelle, why the goalkeeper or goalie is, especially from a strength and conditioning standpoint, is so much different than the midfielder.
Well, the biggest thing with a midfielder, they're constantly moving.
Yep.
Like they're running that field the whole time. Where a goalie, I mean, depending on the game, if it's a really good game and it's back and forth, sure, they're going to get a little bit more action, but they're pretty standstill until the ball is finally in their court. And there's some games too where if they're playing a really terrible team, they don't do much. They're just kind of hanging out, just ready if they need to be ready. I mean, it's no different than a kicker in football versus a different position, like a running back or a tight end. So yeah, same sport, but completely different role that someone's going to play and a completely different asset to the team.
Yeah. And very often too, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Michelle, because I know the sport generally, but structurally very often a different species. The midi is usually a little smaller, not always, but usually the keepers are very big human beings, right? They're often 6'5", 6'6", really big human beings with, if they're not a 2A type fiber, they better be, or they better train to become one because they need to explode first step power, jumping power, 2 to 3 steps left or right. So certainly you know, not only are you dealing with that, but the actual adaptations within themselves to the positions are significantly different too. And probably the geno and phenotype that excels at each of those positions differs quite a bit.
Oh, 1000%. I mean, even when you think about jumping in soccer, anyone who's going to be really jumping a ton is going to be the goalie.
Right.
Especially with those quick movements that they do versus your midfielders. They're usually a lot smaller in stature and they're fast because they're trying to get up and down the field as quick as possible. Where a goalie, their typical build's not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a hypothetical question. I ask this of my sports nutrition class pretty much every semester. In terms of training, even though it's sports nutrition, I still talk about training because you can't separate the sport from nutrition. So I ask this, and it's always interesting to hear what soccer players, but also just non-soccer players, if you're training the goalie, actually you could say, or if you're training a softball or baseball pitcher, do you have them do any cardio? Before, and look, if you want to hear my answer, I'll tell it first, but I want to hear your answer, Tony, then you, Michelle. Do you do any cardio?
And yours is your answer, Mr. A?
Oh, hell fucking no. No. It's pure speed, pure explosion, pure power. Doing cardio does, again, we're talking about performance, does zero. The adaptations to regular aerobic training have nothing to do with the power and speed of pitching, the power and speed of being a goalkeeper. However, almost everyone in my class was like, well, yeah, you do cardio. Well, for general fitness. I'm like, we're not talking about fitness. We're talking about playing a specific position in a sport that's highly skilled. Zero. In fact, I'll even ask a question. Should sumo wrestlers do cardio? Hell no. They might lose weight. They might lose weight. Now, what's interesting is my position apparently is in the minority, which I'm thinking, does anyone understand energy systems? I mean, has anyone watched sumo wrestling? It lasts 2 to 3 seconds. You're like, well, they have to be very explosive and very powerful for 2 to 3 seconds, and that's it. So, Michelle, I can tell you recommend cardio. I can tell by your face.
Now, that's different. I don't think they need the same. I think it's going to be a lessened aspect to it, but I think to an extent you still need some type of cardio aspect in their training. I don't think it should be a ton. I don't think that's an emphasis, but there is to an extent that you might have to use a little bit more endurance aspects in a game. You just never know, and you need to be relatively in shape. I'm going to assume that a goalie in soccer, especially at more of an elite level, is going to be a little bit more well-rounded than a sumo wrestler. But that's just my opinion when it comes to the athleticism. But I also don't know much about sumo wrestling, to be honest.
A little bit more lateral movement ability than the sumo wrestler.
Sumo's all sagittal plane.
Yeah, very sagittal plane, right? You know, I would say this potentially is active rest, maybe. I mean, I understand that. I'm not excluding the potential benefits of low intensity cardio that may improve recovery long term because of vascularization, whatever it is, you know, angiogenesis. It's just we don't want to do damage again, not damage, but train the fibers that are going to lead to explosion, right, adversely by doing a lot of high intensity cardio or even too much long sustained duration. So I would say if they had a month off, maybe some low intensity, putting them in a pool, or, you know, if they knew how to swim, I don't think there's any disadvantage to maybe 4 weeks of a base effort, because I think the adaptation of the fibers necessary for being explosive back once you get back into that training will, you know, that potential will be advanced again. But I think if they're to do it off season, very low intensity, I know you said fitness doesn't matter too much, Joey. I don't know, maybe general health. There may be some role in recovery to optimizing your cardiovascular system. So maybe a 4-week window in the off season, if you want to call it general prep, and then it would start to diminish as the season progressed. That would be my approach.
What I've heard from athletes who are pure speed, pure power athletes is they do it because they feel better. And that's actually the reason. Like, you know what? I just kind of feel better, so that's why I do it. But once they start training specifically for the sport, they pretty much eliminate most, if not all of it. Like if you're doing a shot or the discus or the javelin, you got to be powerful. I mean, no amount of cardio is going to make you powerful.
Right.
But this is where it's the art and science of training. You know, we have the art and science of nutrition, the art and science of training. So it's just one of those fun theoretical questions I like to throw out there.
Yeah,
it is theoretical, and it's often argued about. And the one thing is, you don't want to test it because you don't want to potentially jeopardize the individual's performance by putting them through that cardiovascular conditioning program. You know,
I want Michelle to do that. I want you to get the goalie of your soccer team and say, you know what? We're going to make sure you run the fastest 5K ever. And then let's see how they play goalie.
I'll run the idea by them and let you know what they say.
They'll be like, what happened to Michelle?
Uh-huh.
She's recommending weird stuff. Okay, I want to talk about this because I think Tony's a big fan of this, using imagery.
Yes, my favorite.
Tony,
this was cool.
Tony talks a lot about this in terms of the fight sports. You've got to do a lot of imagery. So you had this paper in the Journal of Sport Rehabilitation, the use of imagery to improve self-efficacy of rehabilitation capabilities in athletes following a sport-related injury. Could you explain sort of the nature of this paper to us?
Yeah. So the biggest aspect was just using imagery as a psychological tool during the rehabilitation processes, and different types of imagery, because there's different kinds. But at the end of the day, there's only so much research when it comes to, yes, exactly this is going to progress us appropriately through rehab. And in my opinion, that happens for a wide variety of reasons, but one, because every individual is different. Imagery in different kinds can help people in different ways. Some people are very skeptical of those types of things, but I think it's super powerful and super helpful. But the whole point was to justify, like, these skills are important and they get left out a lot. Especially, I can speak from an athletic training perspective. I know my areas of AT, my scope when it comes to just going through school is only so much sports psych. If it wasn't for my advanced degrees and what I've been involved in, I wouldn't know near as much. But they play a huge role. But me coming out of undergrad with a bachelor's in athletic training, I would have never thought to be like, well, let me work on imagery with this particular athlete within their ACL rehabilitation, right? So it's really trying to emphasize, like, this is something that we need to really start looking at if we haven't already.
So walk us through an example of how you bring up the ACL. How about something that's super common, like a hamstring pull, and it impedes their ability to run and do sprints? So explain how you would walk an athlete through it.
Just the imagery part?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, you can do, like I said, different types of imagery, but a lot of people that I've found that I've worked with, they'll use imagery in the sense of they try to envision themselves completing a task, or they envision themselves getting through different exercises within rehab to ideally have that final goal. I'm back on the field. I'm feeling good. I can do this. But then you can also have a type of imagery when you're actually visualizing, so your muscle fibers recovering, and you're going through this process, and day by day, you're, advancing and you're getting better, and you're using that mental aspect to ideally increase your rehab time, and hopefully to get you back sooner, versus having this mental block where you might be physically better, but mentally you're not ready to go back yet.
So are you actually walking them through this? Like, do this, do this, do this, and they're just replaying this in their head?
Yeah. And that's where it's like, it's very subjective too, because it's up to the individual. And I've had athletes who, they live and breathe by these types of techniques. And others are like, they're like, oh, it's cool, but it's not something they think about. All they think about is, let me do this exercise. Let me get through rehab and I'm going to get on the field. But I've worked with some athletes where, they might have the same exact injury as a teammate. And I've weirdly had big injuries happen at the same exact time on the same exact game. And one person progresses faster than another person. And a lot of it has to do with just mentally, they're not there and they're not ready for it because it's a lot. So it's just an additional skill to kind of start using and say, okay, well, maybe let's envision this. Let's kind of picture us where our end goal is. Now let's picture each step of the way.
Tony, thoughts?
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. Imagery is so tough. It's subjective. It's hard to quantify. But I think, to Michelle's point too, I see it from a rehabilitative perspective as mental priming, and to some extent physical priming, keeping the individual evolved in the sport when they're not in the sport. And it sounds crazy, but we know, and I wish we had the tools at Nova or anywhere, but it's $1 million. But if you look at fMRI, you will see pre-supplementary and motor cortex activation that is relatively comparable when imagery is done in a multisensory model, right? A multisensory application. The same parts of the brain are going to light up when imaging. Let's say I'm throwing a right hand, okay? And I'm going through that punch. Now, if I know how to image the mechanics, if I can see it, feel it, hear it, I'm going to light up comparable parts of the supplementary premotor and motor cortex as if I'm actually throwing that punch. And moreover, I'm going to get EMG activity in the associated muscle groups. So in many ways, from a athletic performance perspective, I would argue that those who are really great athletes, maybe they have great motor imagery and mental imagery capacity, or they're so good they don't need it. But I would imagine someone like the Tom Brady that wasn't born physically gifted can incessantly be on the field, even if he's in a movie theater. And he is imaging, throwing, when to throw, how to throw, where the receiver is, feeling his foot when he's doing it, because again, just quickly what we know, and even to Michelle's point, you don't learn while you're doing. You learn when you're done doing, and the brain figures out what you did while you're sleeping, no different than than the muscle recovery, which most of it is going on during rest. My point to that is, if Michelle has her client at 9 p.m. thinking about or visualizing themselves being fully active on that leg that just had surgery, right? That at least keeps the brain primed. It keeps neural activation to that area. And then when you go to bed on that, there may actually be some benefits. So this is something really hard to quantify. It will be considered pseudoscience by many pure practitioners of research, but it's invaluable. And I know it has its origins more so in rehab, where Michelle has done some research with it, than it even does in augmenting performance. We took some of rehab's work and now we use it in sports psychology. But you can learn. I tell this to my fighters all day. You have all day to learn. You don't just learn when coach told you for the last hour and a half what to do. Now you go home and go figure out how to learn. And go figure out what coach, and you image your way through that. Every step. What did you feel? Where do I need to be? So it's really, really, imagery to me is fascinating. And everybody, to Michelle's point too, I'll just finish here, has a different capacity to do it. Not everyone can do it really well. And we have motor imagery questionnaires that kind of look at one's ability to create multisensory, olfactory, right? Tactile, touch, visual, of course. What's their ability to do that? If they have a high ability, they may have a high ability to practice their sport 10 hours a day without the repetitive stress injuries that occur from actually practicing their sport 2 hours a day.
Is there a simple way to test this? Like, for instance, if you want to get a group of people who don't know how to juggle 3 tennis balls, and you're like, you know what? You have 2 weeks to learn how to juggle 3 tennis balls. And they both practice physically, but one group has to visualize it. I mean, someone has to have done this somewhere, right? I mean, I don't know. This isn't my field. I'm just asking the question. Michelle, any?
I mean, there's definitely studies looking at different aspects when it comes to having some type of, say like a goal setting, or like, yes, this group of individuals use imagery versus this group use a different type of imagery, or they didn't use goal setting, or they didn't use imagery, and comparing the two. But kind of going off of Tony's point, it's so subjective where it's really difficult to quantify these different measures, and it's really difficult to kind of narrow it down to person, sport to sport, position to position, because everyone is truly going to be different. So I think that's going to be a really difficult thing, even looking at all the studies that have been done, to really try and put into words saying, okay, yes, this is the most beneficial tool ever, versus some people say it's great, then other people were like, no, it didn't really help a lot. But most research say, I mean, it's positive, it's not negative by any means. That's the best part. So it's not like if I introduce imagery or goal setting or a different type of skill, it's going to be detrimental. It's not. If anything, okay, it didn't work for this athlete, but it could for somebody else. So I think that's the beauty behind it. But I do think it's a negative aspect where it is really difficult to kind of quantify.
Right. No, I like it. It's one of my philosophies with the use of sports supplements is this: if it helps or has a neutral effect, you should try it, because it might help. Or the worst that could happen is nothing happens. So, which is fine too. So yeah, there's not a downside to it. I can see there might be an upside. And to Tony's, your point, you mentioned Tom Brady. I've always thought, well, there are guys who, like you say, image this stuff or study film all
That's right.
day.
And that's a part of it.
And
right.
And
Yes.
I always think, okay, I don't know if you remember Jamarcus Russell. He was he might have been a quarterback. He might have been number one pick. He could throw 90 yards without blinking.
Yeah.
Super talented, but never studied film, right? And then you have the Tom Brady's of the world who, I think Tony could outrun him right now when he was at the combine. Just studying, using his brain to understand the field, which, and I would imagine fighters do that too. There's got to be fighters who are like, okay, I'm not as physically gifted, but if I figure out because everyone has patterns. If I figure out their patterns, because when people are in trouble, and correct me, Tony, when fighters are in trouble, they often revert back to what they're most comfortable with. Like if they're in trouble and they're wrestlers, they're like, okay, I just need to wrestle. So there's got to be ways to use imagery to see, okay, I know his or her tendencies, and I'm going to try to take advantage of it. What do you think of that, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. Or there could be, preparing yourself not only to take advantage of their weaknesses, but you could image them attacking you with their strengths. And by rehearsing. So one thing that's a problem in sport, and I think Michelle could elaborate on this better, unfamiliarity is a problem. Unfamiliarity is a delay in reaction time, right? Unfamiliarity, having to think too much. So this is why somebody like Tom Brady prepares so much. There's nothing that can happen that he doesn't know what's going to happen. He's already seen it or he's already imaged it. So to your point, Joey, absolutely. You can take motor imagery and go, okay, boom, he drops his hands after every kick, wham, boom, I'm going to see a right hand. Conversely, man, this guy shoots all the time and I prefer not to go to the ground. Okay, well, I can lie in bed, boom, see that shot, feel that shot, feel my body, feel the sprawl, feel myself relocating. And in a lightning bolt too, it is priming the body so there's less unfamiliarity, if you will, in the event. And that's kind of what imagery does. It puts you, this is why, right, the special operations have done what they're going to do 9,348 times before they do it once. Because now there's almost nothing that can happen that is unfamiliar to them. And then you reach automaticity and that response becomes more automatic. So I think that it could be used in many, many contexts. I'll just share one thing and then sorry, Michelle, you should be speaking.
This is fun.
Yeah, anyway, but here's just quickly, the PET-LEB model of imagery is pretty simple, right? They call it PET-LEB. It's PETTLEP. And what do you want to do? You want to be able to create a physical environment for P. See it, feel it, hear it. Is it a crowd? Is it a stadium? Right? It's physical. Feel that. Then you have the E for environment. What is it like? Is it loud? What's the vision like? What am I hearing? What's the distance of where I'll be performing? The task, what am I going to do? Okay, I'm Tom Brady. It's first and goal. I'm at this stadium. There's going to be a bunch of orange jerseys behind me because I'm in Denver. This is all real. He'll predict going through all that. The timing, what play is it going to be? How long do we have, right? The learning part of it. What do I need to know in this circumstance? Emotion, how will I feel? Calm, relaxed, okay? And perspective, creating the whole thing and how successful I'm going to be during it. Those are very, very general examples, but the PET-led model is just something that teaches us where and how imagery can be put into sport. And you always, like I said, want to have many senses. And when Michelle does that in rehab or studies that with a patient or an athlete, hey, I want to feel that leg operating again, full speed. You don't do the exercises, but you see yourself sprinting just like you did before the ACL injury. You see yourself jumping. You feel yourself jumping. You hear the landing. You smell the grass. This multisensory imagery can really help expedite either skill acquisition, in my view, or recovery if used properly. Or I don't want to say properly because everybody's different, like Michelle said. They may image different, but used effectively for that person.
I want, Michelle, before I comment, remind me to tell you about some mental imagery I do that's a little crazy, but go on. Sorry, Michelle.
No, you're good. That sounds fun too. But no, I agree 100%. You can use it in so many different ways. Obviously, with this specific paper, we were looking at rehabilitation aspects, but that completely translates into, okay, I'm not injured. I'm just trying to get better, or I'm trying to win this next game.
That's right. Yeah.
So I mean, it's completely usable, and it can be used in so many different ways. The person on this paper, Dr. Jamie Dietrich, she was also on my dissertation committee. So her and I work really closely together here, but she has a massive sports psych background. And we talk about it all the time with, different players on different teams. Like, think a kicker in football, people kind of give them a rep of like, well, they only do so much on a game field. They only kick a ball. That's it. They come out every now and then. That is a really high pressure situation.
High pressure.
The most high pressure. And
Yep.
I talk to a lot of football kickers, and they use imagery so much because they have to visualize what's going to happen. Otherwise, if they mess up, everyone always blames the kicker. Oh my God, we lost because the
You're
kicker.
right, Michelle.
So those are good examples too. Like, they try to visualize themselves kicking it, making that field goal, doing what they need to do. But it's very beneficial. And I think it could be beneficial in actual performance. It could be beneficial in rehabilitation. It could be beneficial in just things you do day to day. I mean, even thinking of it now, like I never thought about it before, I visualized myself like finally finishing my PhD when I first started.
Exactly.
Was I anywhere close? No, but I did have a goal.
But you visualized.
I visualized it, and it's here, so it worked at some capacity, because it motivates you. I mean, it being something as simple
It's
as
another,
that.
right, motivational imagery. And just quickly, I'll let you say, Joey, acting is imagery. Acting is imagery. Russell Crowe got the script for Gladiator 6 months before. So he could act like Maximus Decimus Meridius, walk like him, talk like him, think he was in Rome. It's imagery. Bringing to life something through the mind that isn't existing without any virtual activity or environment at that time.
Yeah.
Someone asked me, because I told them there's alligators in our backyard, right? There's a small one, we call him Jimmy, but there's other alligators. And they're like, well, aren't you scared of alligators? And I said, well, no, because I usually run into just small ones, and when you paddle to them, they go away, And they're like, okay, well, what about the 1% where it's a big alligator? And I said, well, believe it or not, this is what I do when I paddle. And this sounds crazy, but so let's say I collide with a large alligator and it grabs me. So here I am. I do this stupid visualization. Okay, what do I do? Okay, grabs my leg. And as Tony and you guys know, it does the death roll. It starts
Death roll.
in. So, okay, I'm visualizing myself underwater spinning. Okay, I got to grab my dive knife. And then while I'm spinning and sucking water, I got to figure out how to put that knife in the alligator. Will it work? I don't know, Tony. I'm afraid of that 1%.
Well, I will tell you this, you're better prepared from the person who hasn't envisioned that out.
Yeah, I don't think that's crazy at all. I think that
Not
makes
at all.
no, that makes complete sense that you're doing that.
And then I wonder, is it better if they grab my arm or my leg? Because if they grab the arm, I could, I got the knife and I'm, like this. They grab the leg, I have a hard time reaching them, so.
You do. And you got to get them right behind the back of the skull. It's not a big area that you have available, by the way. So you better start stabbing things accurately, Joey.
Yeah, start working on that.
Yeah, so Tony, if you don't hear, from me for like a month, I don't know what happened. So they're like, where is he? We're supposed to be collecting data today. The alligator got him. Okay, hey, we don't have much time. So Michelle, tell us about any new cool projects you're doing, anything in specifically maybe in sports nutrition or supplements or anything fun.
Yeah, so like I said, for the first paper we talked about, the differences in knowledge and perceptions, I built off of that since then. So the whole point the last few years, I've been focusing on developing a sport nutrition education intervention to ideally fix the sport nutrition knowledge issue. But then you run into this whole situation, okay, if I can increase knowledge, that's great, but does that even do anything? No one's behavior typically changes just because they got smarter in an area.
Great point.
Like no different where I have a pretty good concept of nutrition. Doesn't mean I'm going to eat the best every single day of my life. So we kind of started going that direction. So we have had different things looking at sport nutrition knowledge, education, interventions, resting metabolic rate, body composition, and then dietary behaviors is like our next big avenue that we're also looking at.
Can I ask you a pragmatic question? What do you guys, Tony will laugh. What do you guys use to assess resting metabolic rate? What machine?
We have a Parvo.
Oh, yeah. Well, we will laugh because we're in the process of trying to put ours back together. But it's not a young one. Yeah.
How old is it?
12.
It's probably older than you.
I knew you were going to say that. You know what? We have two now. One of them is actually older than me, and the new one it's very fresh. It's like 6 months old.
Oh, okay. The one older than you is working still that effectively?
Yeah, so good. And we compare, everything's the same. The usage of it, obviously, there's a lot more work to do with the old one than the new one. But yeah, but we just got the new one literally like halfway through this semester.
Parvo as well, Michelle?
Yeah.
Self-calibrated?
Yep.
No more syringes and
no.
Thank you.
Beautiful. It's the most amazing thing in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tony, the one machine that we really need, it just freaking breaks down all the time.
Yeah.
It's not, I was about 13, 14 years old, and certainly it's fixable, but it's not easy to get new parts these days.
No, and it's a pain to fix too.
Right,
Something feels like it's always breaking or going wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That research area is really neat and valuable, right? Because I love what you said. Most of the country generally knows what decent eating is. I'm not saying they're experts, but they know if they go to McDonald's, a Big Mac is worse than a chicken sandwich, right? And the iced tea is, even with sugar, is better than a shake. But that doesn't mean we're going to do it. And so to your point, we need to find, how do we apply the education and how do we create that motivation? And it's really challenging.
It is. It's a lot of work because we've been doing a lot of intervention studies, and it's really cool and rewarding for sure. But it's the same thing where it's like, okay, if the results aren't great, we still need to fix this issue. Otherwise, it's never going to be fixed. Like our first data we presented on at ISSN last year, we did an education intervention, and we're finishing the manuscript for this now. And we looked at resting metabolic rate and body comp over the course of a season for soccer players in D1 sports. So usually you would think over the course of the season, someone's body comp will go down, whatever. No, it went up. They went up tremendously, significantly, which was insane because we're like, we implemented this intervention and they ended up gaining a ton of weight. What are the odds of that?
Wait, they gained body fat mass?
Yes.
During the season.
Did you not come to my poster last year? That hurts me a little bit.
I showed up with Tony, but you paid more attention to Tony than I.
Yeah, because I could have recited it. I found it so interesting, and I specifically remember it, Michelle.
Totally. But yeah, so this year we did it different, where we implemented an education intervention, just changed the intervention a little bit, did body comp, resting metabolic rate, but this time we also gave them just general recommendations they should hit based off the calculations we had. Their knowledge actually did not change whatsoever, but they maintained their body comp all season with giving them these recommendations to hit. So we saw a difference there, and that's what we
Wow.
presented this ISSN last week. So I mean, there's a lot of growth with it. Like there needs to be a lot more to go, but it's the same standpoint where, okay, knowledge isn't everything. It's what we're going to do.
Right, right. And I just want to say quickly, that's really valuable because those changes in body composition may not only mean a difference in performance, but it may mean a difference in staying healthy through the whole season, right?
Right.
Staying stronger and right. That's really good work. I'm interested to look at it further. So I'm glad you're doing it.
Do you guys have a DEXA in your lab?
No, we don't.
Oh, yeah, it'd
I
be interesting to
wish.
follow, at least look at bone mineral density in female
know.
athletes over a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually did, we haven't, I don't think I've written a manuscript yet, but we actually followed the swim team over the course of a season. And as you know, the training volume of collegiate swimmers is crazy high. They may actually train more hours than any other college athlete. That's my guess. And here's what's interesting. There was no nutrition intervention or anything. We just followed them. And collectively, they all lost weight and fat mass. But we also did a, just for fun, salivary cortisol pre-post. And at the end of the season, super stressed, competing in, NCAA championships, cortisol was elevated significantly, but yet they lost body fat. And so we were trying to show that there's a dissociation between measures of cortisol and body composition vis-a-vis fat mass. And in if you put it this way, if you exercise enough, you're going to lose weight or lose fat.
Yeah.
And certainly swimmers do that. So I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
No, it is, especially a big endurance sport like that. Well, I guess depending on what they're exactly doing, but over the course of the season, usually they are very depleted and they're exhausted for a reason. But yes, like that's why this season when we saw those results, I was like, the knowledge that does stink. Like ideally, we wanted the intervention to increase it, but if they were actually able to maintain everything, the resting metabolic rate was completely maintained, like no changes. That's what we want. I mean, ideally.
Well, you did a great job by moving them from increasing body fat to stabilizing. Now future methodologies and interventions may be able to improve it, right? So this is really good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, since we have maybe a couple minutes left, since we just got back from the ISSN conference, I want to hear your personal philosophy vis-a-vis sports nutrition and/or supplement advice. How do you approach that with athletes?
Oh, like my biggest piece of advice?
Or just your general philosophy when people say, hey, Michelle, how much should I eat? Protein? Should I take creatine? Should I, have 500 grams of sugar before I play soccer? Stuff like that.
Ooh, okay. That's tough. I guess my biggest philosophy is first start with just a general diet. You need to know what you're eating and you need to have a well-rounded diet, ideally. And then you can build from there. So kind of like you were saying, all these different recommendations are, less or more than what you would ever recommend. But at the end of the day, starting point, and then we build, right? Because everyone's different and every sport's different. But I would definitely make sure we have a well-rounded diet. You need carbs, you need proteins, you need fats, you need it all. And then just building from it, I guess would be my biggest.
What about on the supplement side? I'm sure you get those questions a lot.
Yeah, supplements we do get a lot. I'm not the biggest in the sense of a big supplement researcher by any means. But that goes back to, I need to know what your diet is, and I need to see what you do need to supplement or what do we need to enhance, and that's going to start with, I need to know a basis first, and then building off of it, depending on what you're trying to do.
Well, that's great advice. Where can people find you if they want to look you up?
Oh, wow. I'm famous. So I'm on Instagram.
What's Instagram, Michelle?
What's the name?
Hold on. Let me make sure I have it right so I don't say the wrong thing. It's Michelle Singleton, but with 2 N's because someone stole that from me.
Oh, man.
I know. So there's an additional N because I didn't want to do a number. I wanted most people to know, like.
Can't you do Michelle Singleton, Ph.D.?
Yeah, I could probably do that now. Should I change that as we're on this thing?
Yeah, you should. That way,
and then we'll everybody got that? Michelle Singleton, Ph.D.
Yeah, it's easier to find you. Yeah, see, I give good advice sometimes, rarely, but sometimes.
That's debatable. All right, that's my username account. Michelle Singleton, Ph.D.
Are you on Twitter or X?
I think I am, but I don't ever use it.
I think I am. which
Well, I'm not gonna lie, I'm the weirdest millennial. I guess my students teach me everything, because they're the generation below me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know Twitter was still a thing or whatever it is now. And they're like,
X.
everyone does that. And I was like,
X.
really?
X.
X, whatever. I didn't know. Okay. And then they told me like this last year that it's a widely used thing still. I like Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, okay, good, because you're putting out some really good information and research, so I definitely want to keep up on it too. So Instagram for sure and TikTok then.
Yeah, I'll get my Twitter/X going. Just
All
for you
right.
guys.
yeah, because I'm on that probably more than Instagram. So do that.
What? I feel like you're on Instagram a lot. Don't lie.
I'm a sniper. I go in and out really fast.
That's hilarious. All right, hold on. I'm gonna change my name on X
X
to Michelle Singleton, Ph.D. as well.
No, God forbid there's someone with your exact name with a PhD.
No chance. No, there's only one of me.
Well, Michelle, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the Sports Science Dude. We had a lot of fun.